It was a morning that nobody expected. News channels and social media platforms were flooded with breaking alerts. Brandon Blackstock had passed away suddenly. The headlines spread like wildfire, and people everywhere were shocked by the announcement. For many, Brandon was not just a known name, but the former husband of Kelly Clarkson, a man who had once been deeply connected to her personal and professional life. His sudden departure left many questions hanging in the air. Fans and critics immediately began to recall his past, some with sympathy, while others remembered the controversies that had followed him in recent years. The silence from Kelly Clarkson spoke louder than words. While the world kept asking questions, Kelly did not release any statement in those first hours. That silence created even more curiosity. People wondered what she must have been feeling at that moment. After all, their story had been filled with love, conflict, and pain, and his death was bound to bring back memories that she had tried so hard to leave behind. It wasn't just about the loss of a life, it was about the resurfacing of a past that had been buried, and the truths that many believed were still hidden in the shadows. For years, Brandon Blackstock carried the image of a man who seemed almost perfect in the public eye. To many, he was not just Kelly Clarkson's husband, but also her manager, her supporter, and the person standing beside her during some of the most important moments of her career. Paparazzi photos and public appearances painted a picture of a happy couple, smiling at red carpets, walking hand in hand, and sharing family moments that looked genuine and full of love. People admired the way he carried himself, often quiet but confident, always appearing as the strong figure behind Kelly's spotlight. But as with many stories in the world of fame, what was seen on the outside was far from the full truth. Brandon knew how to maintain charm in front of cameras, and the media often highlighted him as the rock of Kelly's life. Interviews and magazine covers showed a family that seemed ideal, raising children together and managing a successful career. Fans believed that Kelly had found not only a partner, but someone who truly understood her world. The narrative of a perfect husband and manager made people trust him, and his image grew stronger year after year. Yet, even at that time, those closest to the couple noticed things that did not align with the picture seen on television screens. His calm public personality hid struggles that many would only come to understand later. The reality of who Brandon truly was, how he acted in private, how he handled his role as a husband, and how he treated the woman everyone admired, was far more complicated than the smile he showed the world. His public image was polished, but behind that surface, cracks were slowly beginning to show. Behind the glamour of red carpets and smiling family photos, the real story of Brandon Blackstock and Kelly Clarkson's marriage was very different. Away from the flashing cameras, there were whispers of tension, long silences, and hidden pain that Kelly carried quietly. Friends who had visited their home sometimes noticed small signs, a conversation that turned cold too quickly, a smile that faded the moment cameras were gone, or the way Kelly would avoid answering certain questions when Brandon was around. These were the little cracks in the so-called perfect marriage, but very few dared to talk about them openly. Those closest to Kelly began to understand that her life with Brandon was not as easy as it appeared. Behind closed doors, Brandon's personality shifted. He was not always the supportive husband that the world believed him to be. Instead, there were moments of control, moments where Kelly's opinions were dismissed, and moments where her achievements were overshadowed by his insecurities. She was a global star with millions of fans, yet in her own home, she often felt unseen and unheard. The weight of carrying that kind of silent struggle left deep scars on her heart. Kelly, known for her strong and joyful spirit, rarely spoke about her private battles. She kept smiling in interviews, kept performing for her fans, and kept giving the world her music. But those who truly paid attention could sometimes sense the exhaustion in her eyes. Living in a relationship where emotional support was missing took its toll. she was constantly caught between protecting her family's image and protecting her own heart. While the world celebrated her success, behind the closed doors of her marriage, Kelly was quietly fighting battles that very few people even knew existed. Away from the bright lights and the applause of sold-out shows, Kelly Clarkson's private world was filled with shadows that very few people knew about. To the outside world, like a woman who had it all, a successful career, a loving husband, and a beautiful family. But those who were closest to her began to notice that the reality was far from the picture-perfect life that magazines and interviews portrayed. Behind closed doors, Brandon's charm often faded. He had a way of making Kelly feel small, not through loud arguments that the world could see, but through subtle words and actions that slowly chipped away at her confidence. Sometimes it was the way he would dismiss her ideas when she talked about new music projects, or how he would turn simple conversations into moments of criticism. To outsiders, these details might seem small, but for Kelly, they built up into a heavy weight she carried every single day. There were evenings when Kelly would come home after giving her heart to the stage, only to be met with cold silence. Instead of finding comfort and encouragement, she often found herself feeling alone in her own home. Friends noticed that her laughter didn't last as long as it used to, and her smiles didn't always reach her eyes. When asked about her marriage, she would carefully choose her words, giving short, polite answers while hiding the pain that she didn't want the world to see. Over time, Brandon's controlling nature became more visible to those who spent time around them. He liked to have the final say in decisions, whether personal or professional, and Kelly, wanting to keep peace, often gave in. It wasn't that she was weak. She was one of the strongest women people knew. But she was tired of fighting battles that no one else could understand. In public, he was her husband and manager, but in private, it sometimes felt as though he was her critic and her jailer. Kelly, who had always been known for her kindness and resilience, carried these struggles quietly. She rarely complained, not even to those she trusted most. Instead, she poured her emotions into her music, letting her songs become the voice she didn't always have at home. Her lyrics spoke of pain, of searching for freedom, and of holding onto hope when everything else seemed to be falling apart. For her fans, those songs were anthems of strength, but for Kelly, they were confessions of the battles she was silently fighting. The truth was that behind closed doors, Kelly lived a life where love and control were constantly at war. Brandon's presence made her feel both tied down and unseen, and though she smiled for the cameras, her heart carried wounds that only time and courage could heal. One of the most difficult parts of Kelly Clarkson's marriage to Brandon Blackstock was the way her career slowly became tangled in his control. In the beginning, it looked like a perfect arrangement. Her husband was also her manager, someone who understood both her personal world and her professional dreams. At first, Kelly believed this would bring them closer. She trusted Brandon completely, giving him the authority to handle her contracts, her shows, and many of her most important decisions. On the surface, it seemed like love and work were blending smoothly. But as time passed, that trust began to turn into a trap. People close to Kelly recall how Brandon gradually took more and more control over her finances. He was the one managing her deals, handling her earnings, and making choices about her projects. Kelly, who had always been passionate about her music and career, began to feel like she had lost her own voice in the process. She worked tirelessly, touring, recording, hosting shows, but the sense of freedom she once had was slowly slipping away. Instead of feeling empowered by her success, she often felt weighed down by the way Brandon handled everything behind the scenes. There were also growing whispers of financial disputes. Reports later revealed that Brandon's management had been accused of misusing funds and not being completely transparent with accounts. While Kelly stayed quiet in public, insiders knew that arguments over money had become a constant source of stress in their marriage. Brandon, rather than being a partner who celebrated her achievements, sometimes appeared threatened by her independence and the power of her career. His demands and expectations grew heavier, and Kelly was left feeling that she was working endlessly, yet not fully in control of the life she had built. For Kelly, the most painful part was not just the financial strain, but the emotional weight that came with it. She began to question whether the man she had once trusted as both a husband and manager truly had her best interests at heart. Behind the smiles, she was wrestling with the realization that her hard work was being overshadowed by control, manipulation, and a lack of respect for her independence. It was not just about money, it was about freedom, about identity, and about the right to live her own life on her own terms. The truth was that financial control became another chain in a marriage that was already filled with unspoken pain. And while the world continued to celebrate her as a star, Kelly herself was fighting for something much deeper, her right to be free, to be respected, and to reclaim the life that was slowly slipping away from her hands. When Kelly Clarkson finally decided to end her marriage with Brandon Blackstock, it wasn't an easy choice. It was the result of years of silent struggles, emotional exhaustion, and battles that no one else could truly see. The announcement of their divorce shocked fans everywhere, because to the outside world, they had still looked like a couple that was holding on. But inside, Kelly knew she had reached a breaking point. She was no longer willing to sacrifice her peace for the sake of appearances. The divorce proceedings quickly turned into a storm that played out not only in courtrooms, but also across headlines. What many thought would be a private separation became a public war. Brandon demanded large amounts in alimony and child support, amounts so high that even fans were stunned when the numbers surfaced. It painted a picture of a man determined to hold onto Kelly's success, even as their marriage crumbled. For Kelly, the legal battle was not just about money. It was about protecting her children, protecting her future, and finally taking back control of her own life. Court documents revealed details that shocked many. Disputes over properties, custody of their children, and even questions about Brandon's management of her finances came into focus. Brandon's lawyers painted him as the victim of the breakup, while Kelly remained calm, rarely lashing out, choosing instead to let the facts speak for themselves. It was not her style to create scandals or to drag people down in public, even when she had every reason to. Still, the pressure weighed heavily on her, and friends said that the divorce battle was one of the hardest chapters of her life. The media covered every step, often twisting the story to make it look like a dramatic Hollywood breakup. But behind the headlines was a mother who was simply trying to protect her children and rebuild her life. Kelly showed resilience that inspired many. She went to work, she kept singing, she kept smiling for her fans, even when inside she was fighting some of the toughest days she had ever faced. She didn't allow the courtroom battles to define her spirit. Instead, she held her head high, determined not to let her pain overshadow the love she had for her kids or the career she had built with her own hard work. By the time the divorce was finalized, Kelly had been through a war that left deep scars. She had faced demands, accusations, and endless negotiations, but she had also found something far more important: her strength. For the first time in years, she began to feel free again. The divorce battle may have drained her emotionally and financially, but it also gave her the clarity she needed to step into a new chapter of life, one where her voice could finally be heard without anyone else trying to control it. When the news of Brandon Blackstock's sudden death broke, it was as if the past that Kelly Clarkson had worked so hard to leave behind came rushing back all at once. For the world, it was shocking and unexpected, but for Kelly, it was complicated. The man who had once been her partner in life and career, who was also the father of her children, was gone forever. Even though their marriage had ended painfully, his absence carried a weight that was hard to put into words. In the days that followed, stories began to resurface. People who had once stayed silent started to share their experiences, and truths that had been hidden during his lifetime slowly came to light. Some spoke of the controlling side of Brandon. Others mentioned how Kelly endured emotional struggles that very few knew about. Close friends revealed how strong she had been, quietly carrying pain while still showing the world her brightest smile. His death became a doorway through which many long-buried truths finally stepped into the open. For Kelly, the days after his passing were filled with mixed emotions. She felt grief, not for the marriage they had lost, but for the father of her children, the man who would no longer be there to watch them grow up. She also felt the weight of unfinished chapters, questions that could never be answered, and conversations that would never happen. At the same time, there was a strange sense of release. With his absence, she no longer had to carry the shadow of his control, nor the constant reminder of the battles they had fought. The world reacted in different ways. Some mourned Brandon as a man who had once stood beside a superstar, while others questioned the choices he made in his personal and professional life. Online discussions grew louder, stories that once seemed unbelievable but now made sense. Brandon's death didn't just mark the end of his life, it reopened a story that many thought was over, bringing out truths that had been hidden in silence for far too long. For Kelly, however, the focus remained on her children. She chose not to speak much in those early days, allowing her family the privacy they needed. While the world debated Brandon's legacy, Kelly turned inward, trying to guide her kids through the confusion of losing their father. It was in this silence that her strength once again shined, because even in the middle of grief, judgment, and memories of pain, she stood tall, showing the world that no matter what storms she faced, she would always put her children first. As the news of Brandon Blackstock's passing spread across the world, the public reaction was immediate and divided. Social media platforms filled with messages, some filled with sympathy and others with sharp criticism. For many people, Brandon was remembered as Kelly Clarkson's husband and the father of her children, and his sudden death was seen as a tragedy. Fans posted old pictures of the couple during happier times, sharing their memories and expressing sadness for the children who had now lost their father. But there was another side of the conversation, one that wasn't built on sympathy alone. For years, there had been whispers about how Brandon had treated Kelly, whispers of control, manipulation, and selfishness. After his death, those whispers grew louder. Old interviews and clips resurfaced online, where fans noticed moments they had previously overlooked, small expressions on Kelly's face, her carefully chosen words, and her subtle discomfort in conversations involving Brandon. People began connecting the dots, realizing that the perfect marriage they had admired might have been far from reality. The media, too, jumped on the story. Talk shows, magazines, and online outlets debated Brandon's legacy. Some painted him as a misunderstood man, a person who struggled under the shadow of his famous wife. Others saw him as someone who tried to use her success for his own gain, a man who failed to appreciate the incredible woman standing beside him. The debates grew intense, with fans and critics divided over how he should be remembered. Through it all, Kelly remained quiet. Her silence became a subject of discussion itself. Some admired her dignity, saying she had no need to explain or relive her pain publicly. Others speculated about what she might be feeling, whether her silence was grief, anger, or simply a choice to protect her children from the noise. The world demanded answers, but Kelly gave none, choosing to let time speak for her instead of words. What stood out most in the public reaction was how Brandon's death reignited conversations about relationships, control, and the hidden struggles of those who live in the spotlight. Fans who once only saw Kelly as a singer now saw her as a survivor, someone who had endured pain, fought for her freedom, and continued to rise above everything life had thrown at her. While the world argued over Brandon's memory, Kelly's quiet strength reminded everyone that, in the end, truth always finds its way out, even if it takes years to surface. After years of battles, both in her marriage and in the courtroom, Kelly Clarkson finally found herself standing at a place where she could begin to heal. Brandon's death brought with it a wave of complicated emotions: grief for the father of her children, relief from years of tension, and the heavy silence of unfinished words that would never be spoken. But in that silence, something else began to grow: strength, clarity, and the courage to embrace a new beginning. For Kelly, healing was not about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it. She carried scars that would never fully fade, but she refused to let those scars define her. Instead, she chose to see them as reminders of her survival. Slowly, she began to speak more openly, not in dramatic interviews or tell-all statements, but in quiet, heartfelt ways. Whether through her music, her television show, or rare moments where she shared her thoughts, Kelly let the world see glimpses of her truth. She spoke about resilience, about the importance of protecting one's peace, and about the lessons she had learned in love and loss. Her children became the center of her healing journey. Kelly poured her heart into being the mother they needed. She wanted them to grow up knowing love, stability, and kindness, not the weight of past conflicts. She worked hard to give them a life filled with joy, teaching them strength not just through words, but by example. Every step she took toward healing, she took with them in mind. At the same time, Kelly reclaimed her career in a way that felt more authentic than ever before. Free from the controlling grip of her past, she began to make choices that reflected her truth. Her songs carried deeper emotion, her performances carried a new kind of power, and her fans felt the change. They no longer saw just a superstar. They saw a woman who had endured pain, who had been broken and rebuilt herself, and who now stood stronger than ever. Kelly's healing journey was not quick, nor was it simple. There were still nights of reflection, moments of sadness, and memories that surfaced unexpectedly. But with each passing day, she proved to herself that she could move forward without being defined by what she had survived. Her story became more than a tale of heartbreak. It became a testament to the human spirit's ability to rise above pain and find hope again. Through all of it, Kelly never sought revenge or pity. She simply sought peace. And in choosing peace, she discovered a version of herself that was freer, stronger, and more resilient than she had ever, even if it takes years to surface. After years of battles, both in her marriage and in the courtroom, Kelly Clarkson finally found herself standing at a place where she could begin to heal. Brandon's death brought with it a wave of complicated emotions: grief for the father of her children, relief from years of tension, and the heavy silence of unfinished words that would never be spoken. But in that silence, something else began to grow: strength, clarity, and the courage to embrace a new beginning. For Kelly, healing was not about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it. She carried scars that would never fully fade, but she refused to let those scars define her. Instead, she chose to see them as reminders of her survival. Slowly, she began to speak more openly, not in dramatic interviews or tell-all statements, but in quiet, heartfelt ways. Whether through her music, her television show, or rare moments where she shared her thoughts, Kelly let the world see glimpses of her truth. She spoke about resilience, about the importance of protecting one's peace, and about the lessons she had learned in love and loss. Her children became the center of her healing journey. Kelly poured her heart into being the mother they needed. She wanted them to grow up knowing love, stability, and kindness, not the weight of past conflicts. She worked hard to give them a life filled with joy, teaching them strength not just through words, but by example. Every step she took toward healing, she took with them in mind. At the same time, Kelly reclaimed her career in a way that felt more authentic than ever before. Free from the controlling grip of her past, she began to make choices that reflected her true voice. Her songs carried deeper emotion, her performances carried a new kind of power, and her fans felt the change. They no longer saw just a superstar. They saw a woman who had endured pain, who had been broken and rebuilt herself, and who now stood stronger than ever. Kelly's healing journey was not quick, nor was it simple. There were still nights of reflection, moments of sadness, and memories that surfaced unexpectedly. But with each passing day, she proved to herself that she could move forward without being defined by what she had survived. Her story became more than a tale of heartbreak. It became a testament to the human spirit's ability to rise above pain and find hope again. Through all of it, Kelly never sought revenge or pity. She simply sought peace. And in choosing peace, she discovered a version of herself that was freer, stronger, and more resilient than she had ever imagined. Brandon Blackstock's death marked the end of a complicated story, but in many ways, it also opened a larger conversation. His life left behind mixed emotions. Some remembered him as a husband and father who played a big role in Kelly Clarkson's journey, while others could not forget the pain and control that surrounded their marriage and divorce. His legacy was not simple, and perhaps it never would be. It became a reminder that the image people show the world is not always the truth that lives inside their homes. For Kelly, the closing of this chapter did not mean erasing the past. It meant carrying it with grace. She chose not to let bitterness define her. Instead, she focused on healing, on raising her children, and on using her story to give hope to those who might be facing silent struggles of their own. Her journey became bigger than just a celebrity's private battle. It became a symbol of strength, of how someone can go through heartbreak, betrayal, and loss, yet still rise with dignity. Fans who once admired Kelly only for her voice now admired her for her resilience. They saw in her story a reflection of their own lives, the pain of broken relationships, the fight for independence, and the courage it takes to walk away from what no longer serves you. Brandon's passing may have brought back memories of the past, but it also highlighted the courage with which Kelly faced it all.